we've completed a set of interviews. We've done this structured listening, transcribed and collected all of these stories from our patients. Now we get to dig into one of the most powerful parts, one of the most exciting parts, which is going back and reading through the stories told by our patients, listening very carefully to what our patients are teaching us. And this is so exciting because this is where the real juice is, the wisdom and what our patients can teach us about their experiences, about how the healthcare system looks from their eyes, and about what's broken in their way when they're trying to get care to save their kids' lives.
Okay, from now on, this lesson assumes that you've actually gone and done interviews and got them transcribed so that we can do Ari's close reading process. Now, if you don't have interviews and transcripts, it's still useful to watch this so you can see the process that happens after the interviews. Now, to physically do this part of the process, Ari printed out the transcripts and annotated them with pens. You could annotate in a Google Doc, and we've given an example of that in the template.
When we did this barrier mapping study, this practice, we took 400 pages plus of manuscripts. I won't get into the particulars of the medical anthropology qualitative methods that we used to build out the coding schema for it or do that deep dive. But essentially, what's most important is that we did a close read of each of our patients' stories, of these manuscripts. And I think the best way to understand how we did it and why it's useful is to actually practice together. And through that process, we start to understand how to do this kind of close reading. Also, why it's so freaking powerful, right? All of their names we've changed for the purposes of their anonymity. Maimuna told us, you know, we have financial difficulties. Why bring my daughter to the clinic and get a prescription with no money to buy it? That's not necessary. That's why we start with home treatment first. If we're lucky, she'll recover this week. If we're not, we'll take her to the clinic. Maybe she'll recover at home, and the money we'd use for the treatment in the hospital will be used for other things. When my husband takes a child to the clinic, I know that the following day he won't give me the complete money for food. Let's look at some of the words that she uses and some of the phrases that she uses to help us pull out what are the possible barriers that Maimuna is facing at this particular moment. Her daughter is sick. She's in this moment and she's describing to us her thought process in that moment, what challenges she's facing and how she's working through them. So first of all, she lays her first and maybe her biggest challenge right at our feet. She says, we have financial difficulties. All right, so we might circle the phrase financial difficulties, and in the margins we might put a $ and say cost barrier as with a question mark. Is this something that we should be tracking? Using some other words that are very important to us. She says, why bring my daughter to the clinic? So there's this step that happens that she's describing, that she has to do, bring her daughter to the clinic, a geographic distance that she has to traverse. And so we might circle, bring my daughter to the clinic, and put geographic barrier, question mark. Then she says, and get a prescription with no money to buy it. Circle with no money to buy it. As we read on, we see the money we'd use for treatment will be used for other things. There's a question, what are those other things? And could there be a barrier somehow hidden in there? It's a bit vague. In the last piece, she says, the following day, he won't give me complete money for food. Circle that and say, okay, food insecurity. I'll look back again, do another read and say, hey, wait a second. It says, when my husband takes a child to the clinic. That's interesting. She didn't say, when we take our child to the clinic, or when I take my child to the clinic. She says, when my husband takes the child to the clinic. I don't want to make any assumptions about why that is. So I might just circle that and put a question of, why does she say, when my husband? That way we're generating some hypotheses. We're also generating some questions, but we're trying not to close the door. And already in just a few sentences, we've seen Maimuna teach us quite a few things. She's taught us that cost barriers are a big deal for her. She's told us that because her family is food insecure, because they're always on the verge of not having enough money to buy food to eat, the cost of care matters. And that is she's told us that is affecting her decision. Also showed us that there is a geographic distance to traverse. And she's told us that her husband and not her is the person who she thinks of as bringing her child to care. Maimuna has taught us a lot. We have to be very careful that we don't generalize and say, oh, because Maimuna said this, that means all patients that live in this area or all Malian patients face this problem in this way. What this kind of very deep dive in a very open-ended way helps us do is start to understand what are the possible challenges that our patients could be facing. Because we're trying to understand very deeply what are the challenges that these particular patients are facing. And by making it very open-ended, they're opening our minds to understanding what is the landscape of possible challenges, what is the universe of possible challenges that our patients could be facing, right? And what are the ways in which those challenges might interact.
If you've done this right, you've done two things. The practical task is to mark up a document, either online or physically, with all the challenges that your patient might face. But more importantly, you've tried to understand the complexity of the people that you're trying to serve. And that actually might take a really long time.
I feel that I could sit with these stories for another 5 years and still not be done learning from them. But I would also say that even if you could spend a few days listening like this systematically and a couple of weeks, the more that we can listen to our patients, the more likely we are to be able to be their partners in the ways that they need us to be.